Hello and welcome back to Linode. In today's video, I have a special treat for you guys because we're going to work on a very awesome project. More specifically, what we're going to do is look at the process of using Jenkins along with Terraform and Ansible to build and configure a Linode instance. And these are three pieces of technology that work very well together. Terraform, as I mentioned in a previous video that I worked on for Linode, is very good at creating infrastructure. When it comes to Ansible, what Ansible is really good at is configuration management. That's what it's used for. And Ansible can take infrastructure that has been created and further customize it to make sure that it ends up in its desired state. And Jenkins is also really awesome because Jenkins can kick off build jobs that include other components, so we can automate the process of using Terraform and Ansible to build a Linode instance, and you're going to see everything I've just mentioned in today's video. Actually, I'm really excited to get started, so let's just dive right in and I'll show you the entire process. In this section, what I'm going to do is show you how to use the marketplace to set up a Jenkins instance. In order to get started with that process, what we'll do is click this button right here that reads Create Linode. After that, we have a tab right here for Marketplace, so I'll click on that. And then if we search for Jenkins, we'll see that we have a Jenkins item right here, so we'll click on that. And then once we scroll down, we could choose the distribution that we want to use with our Jenkins instance. In this case, it's defaulted to Debian 10, which is actually the only option in this case, so we'll just leave it as is for that. For the region, it shouldn't matter which one you choose. I'm going to choose Toronto. Even though I'm in the United States, Toronto is actually the closest data center to where I am physically, so that's why I'm choosing that option. But again, just choose whichever one is the most convenient for you. In the next section, what we're going to do is choose our Linode plan. And the thing is, any of these are, well, fine. There's no actual requirement when it comes to the instance type that you go ahead and choose. So what I'll do is click on Shared CPU, and I'll just go ahead and create mine with the 2 GB instance right here. I think that should be more than enough. You should actually be able to use the Nanode instance type as well, but I'm going to use this one right here. And then when I scroll down, I'm just going to simplify the name right here to Jenkins. And then I'll type in my super secret root password right here. And there we go. Now I'm going to skip everything else, and then I'm going to click Create Linode right here, and that's going to begin the provisioning process for the Jenkins instance that we're going to be using in this video. And it'll take a minute or two for this instance to provision. If we want to follow along and see how far along it is in the process, we can click Launch List Console, this button right here. That'll bring up a window that'll show us what's on the screen when it comes to our Linode instance if it had a screen. You could think of this as the virtual monitor, so to speak. And it's actually, well, pretty far along in the process, so we'll just give it another minute to finish, and then I'll be right back. And actually what I'll do is close the window right here. It should be far enough along for us to be able to use SSH to connect to the instance. So I'll copy the IP address right here, and then I'll open up a terminal. And let's go ahead and use SSH to connect to the instance. So what I'll do is use SSH and then root @ and then I'll paste in the IP address that I copied right here. If you've ever used SSH before, then you know the drill. It's pretty much the same thing. Anyway, I'll press enter. I'll answer yes for this prompt right here. I'll type in my password, and we have successfully logged into the instance. Now, even though this instance has been created, it still might take a few minutes for Jenkins itself to become available. In order to find out if the process is complete, one way we could do that is by listing the storage of the following directory. That's /var/lib, and then Jenkins, and then secrets. Now this folder may not exist for you quite yet because this is actually created further along in the process of spinning up Jenkins. But in my case, I have the initial admin password here, which tells me that the password has been generated, which should also mean that this instance is ready to go. So if we actually cat out the contents of that file, what we have right here is the initial password for the admin user for Jenkins. So in my case, what I'll do is I'll just highlight all of this right here and I'll copy it to my clipboard. And then I'll switch back to the browser And what we should be able to do is copy the IP address here for Jenkins and paste it in a new tab. And we're going to visit that IP address with the port of 8080. So when Jenkins first comes online, the software is locked. And what we'll need to do is paste in the default admin password right here in this box. So I'll paste it in and click continue. Now at this point, what I recommend is that we click on the first button right here to install the suggested plugins. And this might take a few minutes, so I'll just speed this up and fast forward a bit, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so that's done. And next, what we could do is create an admin user for ourselves. That way, we're not using the default admin account. So what I'll do is create a username here. And we can ignore all of these messages here about the connection not being secure. This is just a demo. Now, I would highly suggest that you use a domain and also get a TLS certificate for that domain. That'll help solve this problem, but that's beyond the scope of this video. So what we'll do is just ignore that for now. For the username, I'm just going to use J. That should be good enough for me. And then I'll set up a password. And then I'll confirm the password. And then I'll fill in my name right here. And then my email address. Next, we'll click Save and Continue. And then that brings us to the instance configuration screen. And unless you actually have a domain, what we could do is just simply leave this as is. If you don't have a domain, it just defaults to the IP address here, as you can see, and then the port is going to be 8080. In fact, that's what we already see up here in the address bar. So we'll click Save and Finish, and then we'll start using Jenkins. And take a look at that. So now that we have Jenkins set up and ready to go, we're going to put it aside for now. We'll come back to it later. But for right now, I want to show you guys the code that I've written for this particular video, and we also need to test it to make sure that it's fully working before we add it to Jenkins. So we'll go back to our Linode dashboard here, and we'll copy the IP address for the instance that we've just created. And then what we're going to do is open a terminal, and we'll get started. And I'm still connected to the instance via SSH, and that's convenient because that's exactly where I want to execute the commands that I'm about to show you. Anyway, what we're going to do right now is install Terraform. And I'll just paste in the first command right now, and then I'll go over what exactly it's doing. And here it is. So our goal right now is to set up the Terraform software repository, but in order to do that, we'll first need to install the GPG key. And this key will help us ensure that the packages we download have been successfully signed. And that's what this command is doing. We're installing the GPG key for the repository that we'll be adding shortly, so I'll just press enter right here, and that'll get that key installed on our system. And now it's done. Next, what we're going to do is install the actual repository itself. So I'll paste in the command for that right now. And what this is a simple apt repository for Debian and Ubuntu. And there's nothing really stand out about this command right here. We're just adding the repository required for Terraform to our system, so that way we'll have access to it. And we're also referencing the key within this particular string, the key that we've downloaded, which will help validate everything is signed successfully. So I'll press enter. And now the repository has been installed. Now next what I'll do is run apt update. And what that'll do is help us ensure that the packages within that repository are available to us. So I'll press enter, and this one should finish fairly quickly. In fact, it's already done. Next we'll run apt install and then Terraform. That'll help us get Terraform installed on our Linode instance. And that's actually a fairly small application, and it's already finished. Now another thing that we'll need to do is install Ansible itself. That'll come in handy at the end of the process when we actually want Ansible to start configuring the instance that Terraform itself creates for us. And to do that, we'll run sudo and then apt install. And then we'll install the Ansible package just like that. I'll press enter. And it'll also install some dependencies as well. That's fine. I'll press enter to accept the default of yes. And that's going to get Ansible installed on our Jenkins instance, which is now already finished. Now the next command I'm going to give you is going to help us set up an SSH key for the Jenkins user. To switch to that user, what I'll do is run su and then hyphen, and then the username is Jenkins. This is the same user that Jenkins itself runs under. So I'll press enter on that. And as you can see, we have switched over to the Jenkins user. As that user, we'll create an SSH key, and that's going to come in handy because we're going to need it later. So what I'll do is type SSH-keygen -T for type. I want to create a key with a specific type, and the type is going to be ED25519. Not only is this key type more secure, but also the keys are shorter when it comes to the number of characters within the key itself, and that just makes everything simpler. Anyway, I'll press enter. And here it's telling us where it's going to create the SSH key for the Jenkins user. Notice that the path is /var/lib/Jenkins, and that's actually expected. When the Jenkins user was set up by the marketplace, the var lib Jenkins directory became the home directory for that user, and then underneath that we'll have a .sh directory, and the file name will be id_ed25519. That's going to be the private key. The public key will have the same path and the same name, ending in .pub. If you already have a key at this particular location, it will be overwritten, just keep that in mind. Anyway, I'll press enter to accept the default. For the passphrase, that's beyond the scope of this particular video, so I'll press enter to bypass that as well. And I'll press enter one more time. And now we have an SSH key. And like I mentioned earlier, the home directory for the Jenkins user is quite unique. If I echo the $home variable, as you see here, you can see, like I mentioned, the home directory is /var/lib/Jenkins. That's also the same directory that I'm inside of right now. If I list the storage, we have a bunch of files here, but among them, we have a .sh directory. And there we have our private key as well as our public key. And again, this is going to come in quite handy here very shortly. Now the next thing we're going to do is actually use Terraform manually to build an instance. Now of course we're going to want Jenkins to do that for us, but before we set that up, we want to make sure that our code is working, and I haven't given you the code yet, but I will shortly. But before we get any of this working, we will require an API key. And to acquire that, what we'll do is actually switch back to our browser, and then right here in the Linode dashboard, we'll find our username up here at the top right corner. We'll drop that down, and then we'll click API tokens. Now currently I don't have any tokens, so what I'll do is create one right now by clicking this button right here. And once this comes up, we'll give it a label. And I'll name mine Linode-Terraform-Ansible. And then if we scroll down a bit, we have some additional fields that we'll need to configure. By default, this particular API token will expire in 6 months. That means that anything we use this token for will no longer be able to use the token after that time. Now you can configure this. You can set it to expire in a shorter amount of time, or never if that's what you want. Now in my case, I'm only using this to record this particular tutorial, so I'll just choose 1 month for this. But you could choose whatever you'd like for that setting, it really doesn't matter, just depends on your preference. And then next we'll need to configure what the key has access to do. Now by default, it's going to give the key access to everything. Read-write is access to everything, and as you can see, everything underneath that is checked. Now that's not ideal, however. We really don't want to give an API key access to everything. That could actually work against us, especially if the key was to fall into the wrong hands. So what I'll do is give the API key access to the account itself, but only read-only access. I don't intend to make any changes whatsoever to my account, so I'll just leave it at read-only for that. For databases, we're not going to be using that for this particular tutorial, so I'm going to completely disable that. In my case, I'm not going to be configuring domains either, so I'll set that to none as well. In fact, I'll just go ahead and choose none for each of these settings here. Then when it comes to images, I'll give it read-only access. We will need access to the images or distribution images in order to create an instance from an image, but we won't be making any changes to the images here, so we're just going to leave that at read-only. For IPs, I'll give it full access to that, as well as Linode's as well. Next, read-only access for Longview. And then I won't be using any node balancers for this tutorial. I also won't be using object storage or stack scripts. And then finally for volumes, I'll give that read and write access. And that completes this particular section. And if you need a moment to create the API key, you could pause the video right here. You can just take a look at the individual settings that I've set. And once you're ready, we can go ahead and continue. Once you are ready, we'll go down here and we'll create the token. And here we have the actual token itself. So what I'll do is copy it, and then I'll store it somewhere safe. I'll just open up a text editor off camera and make a record of that. I recommend that you do the same. At this point, we can click I have saved my personal access token to confirm that we've done that. Once you do click this button though, you will not be able to get this key back. Just make sure that you have it saved before you continue. And now that brings us back here to the account. I'll just click on Linode's right here. And as you can see, I have my Jenkins instance right here. And what I'll do is connect to that instance via SSH. Actually, I'm still connected. So I'll bring the terminal back up on my screen. Now we will return to the Jenkins user shortly, but what I'll do for now is hold Control and press D to disconnect from that user. And now I'm back to root. As root, what we'll do is create a directory for the Terraform files to be stored in. So what I'll do is type mkdir-p for create parent. And then I'll create the /Jenkins/jobs directory. And this is where I plan on storing the individual files for today's tutorial. Next, what I'm going to do is give the Jenkins user full access to that directory. So I'll type chown, Jenkins for the user, Jenkins for the group, -R for recursive. And I'm going to apply that against the directory that we've just created. And since I use the -R option, I don't have to type the entire path. Since that stands for recursive, that's going to change the permissions on everything from this folder on down, which will also take care of the subdirectory of jobs as well. Now with that done, what we're going to do is switch to the Jenkins user yet again. And then we'll navigate to that directory that we've just created. Now the next thing I'm going to do is create a brand new directory. And what I'll do is name it Linode_build. And also the very fact that I was able to create that directory means that I have full access to this particular jobs directory as the Jenkins user. So I guess that means that when I set the ownership of this particular directory, that worked just fine. Inside the new directory, what I'm going to do is create our very first Terraform file. So we'll use a text editor, doesn't matter which one. I'll just use Nano, it's simpler to explain anyway. And what I'll do is call the file Linode_instance.tf. .tf is the file extension for Terraform files. We want to make sure that we do name the file to end in .tf. And here we have a blank file. So what I'll do is paste in the contents right here, and then I'll go over exactly what I'm doing, and then we'll go from there. And here's the file. Now a full walkthrough of Terraform is beyond the scope of this video, but I will try my best to make sure that you understand exactly what we're doing with this file. The first thing to know is that a TF file or .tf file, like I mentioned, is a Terraform file, and inside such a file, we can include instructions on how we want to provision infrastructure. In this case, what we want to do is work with the Linode provider. So in the first section here, I have the Terraform section, and then under required providers, I have Linode. The source is going to be Linode/Linode in double quotes, and then we also have the version as well. In this section here, we definitely want to make sure that everything we type in this file is exactly as I have it in this first section. The version needs to be the version that it is right here, and the provider also needs to be Linode/Linode. This basically tells Terraform which cloud provider we want to work with. Terraform itself is able to work with multiple clouds, so it is a multi-cloud solution. And that's why we have to specify to Terraform which cloud provider we intend on using. Now in the next section here, we're going to set the token to var.token, and what that means is that we intend on using a variable named token. It's actually best practice to ensure that we don't have API tokens within our code in clear text. We could always put those in a separate file, which is exactly what I plan on doing. Let's go ahead and move on from there. And the next section after that is where we configure the Linode instance that we plan on building. Under resource, what we want to do is create a Linode instance. So that's why I have that typed right there. And then after that, we have a name or label for that instance. I'm just going to call mine Terraform Web. We can assume that we're creating a web server as the example, which is actually exactly what I'll have you do. So I just called it Terraform Web. Next, we choose the image that we want to use for the Linode instance. In this case, I want to use an image from Linode, and the image that I want to use for this instance is the Ubuntu 22.04 image. If you're curious what all images are available, you can consult the API documentation, which is going to have a list of all the images that are available to you. So if you wanted to use a different distribution, you can go ahead and do so. However, I recommend that you use Ubuntu 22.04 for this particular example, because the commands that I'm going to show you have actually been tested against Ubuntu 22.04. And if you use a different distribution, it may not work as intended. The next option we have is the label. And here I have it set to example-instance. Now the difference between the label at the beginning of this block right here and the label that's a few lines down is that Terraform Web is how we actually refer to the instance within Terraform itself, and then the label of example instance is the label that we'll see in the Linode dashboard when we create this instance. Under region, I'm going to set this to US East. You could always change that to another region if you'd like. Again, check the API documentation to find out what's all available. After that, we have the type. This is the plan for your Linode instance. And all of the instance plans that we can select for our instance is going to have a label similar to G6-standard-1. That's another thing that I recommend you check the API documentation for, which is going to have a list of the instance types or plans that are available to us. Continuing, we're going to set the root password, and I have it set here to var.root_password. What this means is that I would prefer not to include the root password here. Instead, I'd rather include it in a different file. So I'm going to create a placeholder, a variable placeholder right here, and it's going to expect that we declare a variable named root_password. So we'll definitely want to make sure that we create that before we launch this particular script. Continuing, we have authorized keys, and again, we're setting that equal to a variable. The brackets are required because this particular field is a list. We could have multiple authorized keys if we'd like. We're only going to have one in this example. And instead of actually typing out the key right here, or the contents of the key, I have another placeholder, var.ssh_public_key. Now, continuing from there, we have a remote exec provisioner. Now, a provisioner in Terraform is a method of configuring the instance after it's created. Now here, I'm just simply cutting out the contents of the etc os release file. It's not actually a change, but it does require that we have SSH working in order for us to view the contents of that file. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to make sure that SSH is fully available before we go any further. By adding an inconsequential command such as that one right there, then what we're going to do is cause everything to pause until SSH is available. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, part of the example here is to use Ansible to further configure the instance. But Ansible will not work unless SSH is available, so by including this line right here, we're just causing the entire process to pause until SSH is available, and then after that, later in the file, we're going to use Ansible to configure the instance. Right after that, we have the connection section. That's required when it comes to the provisioner because we need to configure how it's going to configure to the instance. For type, we have that set to SSH, and the reason for that is because that's what we want to utilize for the connection itself. The default username when it comes to Linode instances is the root username. The root account is the most powerful account on the system, and I highly recommend that you create a standard user. But that's something that we've gone over in other videos. For now, we'll just leave it at root. So that's why I have the root username right here. And then after that, we configure the host. And that setting right there is how we tell Terraform which instance in particular we want to connect to. In this case, we want to connect to the instance that Terraform itself is building, and there's no way that we're going to know the IP address ahead of time. For that reason, I have it set to self.ip_address. And what that'll tell Terraform to do is grab whatever the IP address just so happens to be with the instance that it's creating and populate it right here in its place. Continuing, we're setting the private key, and we're also setting that to be a variable as well, something that we'll be declaring later. Now I'll scroll all the way down, and we're now at the end of the file. And this provisioner right here is what's going to cause Ansible to further configure the instance. Now earlier I mentioned that I had the command cat/etc/os release in this particular file as an inconsequential command that I wanted to create just to have something to use SSH for. We want Ansible to go ahead and configure the instance, so I didn't want to add a command right there for configuring anything. Like I mentioned, I wanted something there to pause the process. So by the time it gets down here to the last line, then SSH is fully available, and that means Ansible should be free to go ahead and provision the instance. So what I'll do is save the file, and I'll exit out. That's Control O and then Enter to save the file, and then Control X to exit out of the editor. Now there's another file that we're going to want to create right here, and this is actually going to be the variables file that's going to include what the variables in the previous file are equal to. So we'll name it as variables.tf, and I'll press Enter. And here we have the contents. Now I mentioned earlier that we had some placeholder variables for Terraform, and this is the file right here where we're going to configure what those variables actually equal. The reason why we have this in a separate file is because if we were to upload this to a version control system, well, that would be a bad thing because we have some very important information here, some critical information in clear text. For example, in the very first section here, we have variable token. In the previous file, we were referring to the token, and the token is going to be the API credential that we created earlier. We definitely don't want to show this in clear text in any way, shape, or form. If we do, we have to revoke that key because we can no longer trust it. On my end, I don't mind actually showing you guys what my key is, because by the time you're seeing this video, I would have already deleted the key, and, well, there's no danger in me showing it to you. But just keep in mind, though, that you never want to show this key in clear text. And again, the reason why we have everything here in a separate file is because if we're using version control, then we can simply omit this file and not include it in version control and keep this local. That way there's no danger of any of the secrets leaking out. Anyway, just make sure that you set the line right here where it shows default equals, and what you'll paste in between the double quotes is whatever your API credential happens to be. This one right here is the one that I generated earlier, so that's why I pasted that key right here. In the next section, we declare the root password. In this case, I have it set to super_secret_password, and that's a terrible password. You definitely want to use a randomly generated password. In this case, this is just a demo, and this particular instance will only exist for as long as it takes me to show you the process in this tutorial. On your end, I recommend that you create a randomly generated password and use that in place of super secret password like I have here. Moving on, we have another variable, SSH private key. In this case, we're going to target /var/lib/jenkins.ssh and then a file of id_ed25519. Since the home directory for the Jenkins user is /var/lib/jenkins, and then underneath there we have the .ssh directory, that's where the key is stored. So that's why I chose this particular path right here. Next, we have SSH public key. The type is string, and it's actually set to nothing. Well, actually, that's because we have to fetch the public key. So what I'll do is save the file. Again, Control O and then Enter, and then Control X to exit out. And what I'll do is cut out the contents of tilde/id_ed25519.pub. Now, unlike the private key, the public key is perfectly fine to show everybody the public key. That's why it's called a public key. It doesn't matter if other people see it. Now what I'm going to do is just copy the actual key itself. I don't really need the information that's at the end of the key here. I just need the highlighted section here. The last part is just showing the username and then the host name where the key was generated from. But that's not something we're actually going to use. We just need the first section here where it shows SSH-ed25519. And then we have the public key itself. So what I'll do is copy that to my clipboard, which I've done. And let's bring up that variables file one more time. We'll go all the way down here, and we're going to paste it right here between the double quotes. And there it is. So now we have the completed variables file right here, which is awesome. I'll go ahead and save it, and then exit out. Next, what we're going to do is create yet another file. And this time, I'm going to name it Apache.yml. And that's a brand new file extension that we haven't seen so far in this video. What's up with that? Well, this is for Ansible. Ansible itself uses the YAML format, which is why we have the extension that we have right here for this file. And just like last time, I'll paste the contents right here. And there we go. Now, a full walkthrough of Ansible is beyond the scope of this video, but what I will do is go over exactly what I'm doing right here, which should be actually enough for you to understand how Ansible is going to configure the instance. Up here at the very top, I'm just going to give the playbook a name, and if you're wondering what playbook means, That's what Ansible uses to refer to its configuration files. The YAML files themselves are known as playbooks in the context of Ansible. After that, we have host and then all. And all that means is that it doesn't really matter which particular server this is going to be executed against. Now, alternatively, we could have an inventory file right here if we wanted to target specific servers, but we're keeping this example very simple. Become and then yes, what that refers to is sudo. We're enabling sudo access because we want to make sure that the instructions within this file are able to be executed. Next, we have a tasks section, and underneath that, we have two individual tasks. The first one is going to do a full dist upgrade. We want to make sure that any instance we create starts off with all of the security updates already installed. So that's why we have upgrade dist for the first section underneath apt. And then after that, we have update cache, and we set that equal to yes. And the end result is going to be apt upgrade, and then apt dist upgrade. It's going to refresh the list of available packages, and then it'll proceed to install any updates that might be available. After that, we're using the apt module again, this time to install a specific package, the Apache.yml package. We'll set the state to latest. We want to make sure that we have the latest version. And we also have update cache equals yes, which actually shouldn't be necessary, so I'll just back that out. We've already done that in the previous step there. But we at least want state latest to make sure that it's the latest version. So let's go ahead and save the file and exit out. Now there's another file that we'll need to create, and this time what we'll do is name the file Ansible.cfg. And this is a configuration file for Ansible itself. If we have an Ansible.cfg file in the current directory, then Ansible will use that particular file. And inside that file, what we'll do is add the code that you see right here. We're just adding 2 lines, so it's super simple. We're setting defaults, and we're actually disabling host key checking. That'll make sure that SSH host key errors will not stop us from configuring the instance that we're setting up. And actually, it's just that simple. So I'll save the file, and then I'll exit out. At this point, we should be ready to go. We have all the files that we need to automate the process of building a Linode instance. And we will be configuring Jenkins as a proof of concept to execute this for us. But before we do that, what we want to do is just make sure that it works. We want to make sure that we have no typos or anything like that. So we'll test it manually just to prove that it's working, and then we'll go into Jenkins and add it as a build job. Now, anytime we create new Terraform configuration, there's a command that we'll need to run in order to make sure that we have everything we need. And that command is Terraform Init. What this command will do is download the provider. Earlier, we set the provider to Linode, but we don't actually have the Linode provider on our system. In fact, Terraform has no providers at all. Now, there's a bunch of providers for Terraform for any cloud environment out there that you might think of, but it doesn't install them by default. So Terraform Init will read our files, find out what provider we intend on using, and then download the provider information for that particular provider. So I'll press enter. And it worked. Here we can see that Terraform has detected that we intend on using the Linode provider. After all, that's what we had in the file, and then it initialized that provider. So far, so good. Next, what we'll do is run Terraform and then Plan. Whenever we run Terraform Plan, it won't make any changes at all to our cloud provider. It won't create any networks or instances or anything like that, but it will do some sanity checks that'll help us understand if we have any errors like syntax errors that might get in the way. Now, Terraform Plan will not detect 100% of any syntax errors we might have, but it will give us a basic idea where we stand when it comes to the configuration that we've written. So I'll press enter. And what we're seeing right here is a list of all of the things that Terraform will do if we were actually to run it for real. In this case, it's going to, well, create basically everything that we set up in our Terraform files. And that's what this is. It's a summary of the changes that Terraform might make. Now, I mentioned that Terraform Plan is not going to make any permanent changes or, well, perform any actual tasks at all. It's just a sanity check. In order to run Terraform for real, what we'll do is run Terraform and then apply. So I'll press enter. And here it's telling us, just like last time, what Terraform plans on doing in order to make the instance exist according to the specifications that we set up in the file. In order for us to actually have Terraform do what it's doing, we need to answer yes right here at the end. So that's what I'll do right now. I'll just type yes and then press enter. And check it out. Now Ansible is doing its thing. It's installing all available updates exactly as we asked it to do. And once this is done, it's going to move on to the next play, which is to install Apache itself. So I'll just give this a few minutes to complete, and then I'll be right back. So what I'll do is go back to the web browser. I'll copy the IP address for the instance that Terraform itself created. I'll paste it right here. And there we go. We have the Apache 2 default page. That means that Apache is successfully running on the instance. And the instance itself was created by Terraform, and then Ansible was responsible for updating the individual packages, installing the security updates, and also it was responsible for installing Apache, which it's done. So as we can see, the process is a complete success. But how exactly do we get Jenkins to do this for us? However, we kicked off the job manually. How exactly do we get Jenkins to execute this for us? Well, I'll close this tab right here and let's switch back over to Jenkins. And here we are. So what I'll do is I'll create a brand new job, and here we're going to name our project. And what I'll call it is the Linode Builder. And I'll create it as a freestyle project. I'll click OK. And now we actually have a build job, but it's not configured yet. So what I'll do is add a description. And then I'll scroll down. I'll go ahead and create a build step. And then the type is going to be execute shell. And then right here, what I could do is paste the commands that I want Jenkins to carry out for me. Now, before I do that, I'm going to switch back to the Linode dashboard. And the example instance that we've created in the previous step, what I'll do is just delete it. Just make sure you're deleting the correct instance. I'll confirm the deletion of that instance. And the reason why I did that is because if the Terraform job sees that that instance already exists, then it's not going to do anything. It's going to assume that the requirements have been met. But now it's deleted. So I'll go back here to the job configuration, and then I'll paste in the individual commands that I would like Jenkins to carry out. What I've done is I've pasted in the commands right here that I want Jenkins to carry out for me. And the first command is going to instruct Jenkins to change directory into the /Jenkins/jobs directory. And underneath there, the Linode_Terraform_Ansible directory that we created earlier. After that, it's going to initialize Terraform. Notice that I have -input equals false. And what that'll do is instruct Terraform that there's going to be no operator in front of the terminal, that this is something that's going to be executed as part of a job that's going to be unattended. Other than that, though, there's nothing different here when it comes to the Terraform Init. Next, it'll run Terraform Plan, but this time it's going to create an output file of tfplan. Again, we're going to use the -input equals false option here for the same reason as before. After that, we have Terraform Apply with the same -input equals false option, and it's going to use the tfplan file, the file that was created from the Terraform Plan command that ran previously, as the input file that's going to instruct Terraform Apply what to do. And actually, that should be it. So I'll click Save. And now we have a completed job. So back in the dashboard here, we can see our job here. The weather is sunny. Actually, it's Michigan. It's not sunny currently, but this doesn't pertain to that. In this case, weather pertains to how many failures we have. We don't have any failures currently because we've never run this before. So what I'll do is click the play button right here, and that'll actually run this particular job. Now remember, I don't have an instance here that's named example instance. We deleted it. So if this works, what we should see is the instance come to life within the Linode dashboard. So I'll click play and see what happens. Now, even though we don't see anything here, it's actually running. So if I refresh the dashboard, I could just click on dashboard here. And it looks like the weather is stormy and the builds have failed, but why is that? Well, let's click on this and find out. Right here, we can see the most recent build, so I'll click on that. And then we'll take a look at the output from the console here. And of course, I have the wrong directory name right here. So what I'll do is go back to the dashboard. I'll click on the job one more time. I'll go back to configure. And then what I'll do is correct this line right here. I named it Linode build. So I'll make sure that I have the right name here. Let's save it. And let's try this one more time. Back to the dashboard, let's click the play button. And it should be running. Let's refresh the page. Actually, I didn't even have to refresh the page. You can see it right here. So I'll click on it. And then I'll click the most recent build. Again, console output. And we can watch the output as Jenkins carries out the task that we've asked it to carry out for us. And it's actually doing it. So right here, we can see that the example instance is being created. And we were able to do that with Jenkins. So I'll give this a few minutes to complete, and then I'll be right back. And it actually looks like it's already done. Well, it kind of is. The instance has been created, but as we can see right here, Terraform is still carrying out some of the tasks that we've asked it to do, so we're just going to give this a few minutes to finish, and then I'll be right back. And it's done. Check that out. Just to make sure, let's go back to the Linode dashboard. I'll copy the IP address for the new instance. Let's paste it into a new tab and see what happens. And check that out. Again, we have the Apache 2 default page. Thanks to Jenkins, Terraform, and Ansible, we have a brand new instance right here that's all set and ready to go. So there you go. We just took a look at the process of setting up Jenkins, Ansible, and Terraform to automate the process of building a Linode instance. That was a lot of fun. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you did, then please click that like button to let YouTube know that you've enjoyed this video, and that'll help ensure we see more Linux-related content here on YouTube. As always, thank you so much for checking out this channel and checking out this video. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again very soon.